to go back there. It was supposed to just be a 10-week temporary situation. And I was supposed to go right back to being 100% self-employed. At no time was I ever supposed to be there. And then I couldn't get any pieces of my life back. I further lost pieces of my life. And then almost 2 years later, by the time I was 34, I was completely laid out, completely incapacitated. And that's when I was forced to start to figure out like what happened, what the injury was, who caused it. It didn't take too long, but we figured it out. And then I was left with no treatment, but that was my mother's doing as a Beaumont Hospital employee for all those years. So initially, because I was in such an extreme state, I didn't realize that's what she did until after the fact. There was several incidences that happened, so I released some videos on those already. It wasn't until after the fact that I realized that that's what she was doing, because I was near death, so close to death, and I was literally in a medical emergency, and I could not string sentences together or talk or explain myself. And I didn't have the ability to like comprehend what she was doing because of the state my brain and my body were in from the carbon monoxide and from the brain injuries. It wasn't possible. And then once I wasn't getting any treatment, I had to get down to the bottom of why I wasn't getting any treatment, which then led me down the path to figure out what she was doing. In order to get treatment, I had to get to the bottom of why I wasn't getting treatment. And then I eventually found the private center about 14 months into the extreme part of my injury. So it was still a couple years from that point before I crossed a threshold where I could like exhale and kind of start to put things together, um, piecing together more of her crimes along the way, the things she was doing during my injury, because it was the things she was doing during my injury that caused, all her disorders, all her crimes to come out. That's what caused it, and her behavior during that time period. But I wasn't really beginning to put all this together fully until like the beginning of 2021. However, I was starting to gather evidence and pieces the few years prior to that. I just couldn't do anything with it yet. But all those years, so all during my 20s, I stayed in fight or flight mode. I stayed in survival mode. I kept working very hard, had my numerous streams of income, would get completely financially wiped out or chased from this home or that home. And she's causing all of this using other people and agencies, and then kidnapping my kids along the way numerous times, trying to portray herself to have custody. This is also causing wipeouts and disruptions, and it's causing all these problems. And I just kept juggling all of it, living in survival mode every step of the way, not realizing the reason she was doing all this was to gain access to this trust fund. That's why she kept kidnapping my kids, was to portray herself to have custody, because she was able to fraudulently gain access to some of the trust fund. And that's how she did it. And she needed her family members and everybody else around her to believe that as well, because I do believe she used several people to help back up the false narrative that I just dumped my kids off, she has custody of them or whatever. And she made all those people all along the way believe that that was the situation, when that was never the situation. They just believed whatever she was saying, but that was the reason all of that was going on. So because my life was so chaotic and it was so extreme every step of the way, I didn't really have time to stop and think why all of this was going on. And because I had lost a bunch of memories, initially I lost the memory that this trust was even left for me. So it wasn't until I got brain damage giving birth to my youngest son, suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning at 32 years old, that's when the memories started coming back. A lot of the memories came back the first few years, the first 2 to 3 years, a lot of them came back. That's where the memory came back that it existed. And it wasn't until I was completely laid out and under some treatment, because I could not process thoughts or address anything. I was literally in an extreme medical emergency with continuous extreme brain swelling and 50, 60 severe symptoms at once, and unable to speak, communicate properly, process thoughts, none of that. So I wasn't able to actually figure any of this out. I was just getting the memories of what was all missing and the pieces that had been missing. And then her behavior at that current time was giving more insight and more clues to what was actually going on. So I was actually collecting the evidence, even though I couldn't address any of this or process the thoughts. It wasn't until I was under treatment for about a year or two, well, maybe not two, but I was probably under treatment for about 6 months to a year when I finally started to be able to piece together in my mind what the actual problem was, because I was completely laid out. I was completely incapacitated for about 3 years. I did, do a few things around the house, but I did not leave home. For those 3 years, I only went to treatment and back in a very small handful of times, went to work and back in order to maintain everything, because I provide everything for myself. I had to continue getting the money for my bills. And I knew at that point I was permanently injured for life, and I didn't have the ability to rebuild as I did those several times in the past where she had completely wiped me out. I knew I didn't have the ability to rebuild, and I had to continue forward with what I was left with the day I became injured. So I did just do those few things. And as I was laying there incapacitated the majority of the time for those 3 years, that's where I was able to piece things together. All the pieces came together. Her activities during that time, some of the proof was brought directly to my home. She got my dad to bring it here as if she was like narcissistically abusing me, but what she was actually doing was bringing me evidence. And she didn't realize that I was putting everything together. And that's when I started realizing everything that had happened along the way was so she could gain access to this trust fund. All the problems I had, all the harassment, the reason I was in survival mode, why I had all these problems along the way with all these people and agencies, why I was forced from every home, why I had all these wipeouts, I was able to finally put it together. But because I was so injured, I didn't have the ability to incorporate anything else into my life or get from point A to point B. I was barely getting from point A to point B. I was barely getting to the treatment center. And my injury ran right in with COVID. So half of that 3 years was COVID. And uh, so I wasn't able to like really address any of this yet. But the second I got through enough treatment and got like across a small threshold where I was able to get a better flow of removing the toxicity from my brain, and I was at a flow. I was not like crossed the major threshold yet, but I needed to bring somebody in on a mental health professional type level. So I tried to bring several people in, just like how I tried to seek help at many different facilities and specialists, which was like over 20 times. I had to attempt to try to bring several people in, but they were not understanding the seriousness of the situation, the severity of what was actually going on, and how injured I was. And I needed somebody to understand how injured I was as well at that time, because it looked like I had a mental disorder and a drug problem. And ironically, that's what my mother's been portraying me to have and look like all these years, when that was never the situation. I was literally just working very hard my entire life. And it just so happened that I had an injury that looked like that. So when I got the first chance, the very first second that I could incorporate getting to somebody once a week, because I knew it needed to be once a week. But I literally just couldn't. I was in such an extreme medical emergency, I couldn't do it. But the second that I could, I brought somebody in and I got her to follow along with me. I needed her to get to know the real me first and see the injury that was going on in the current. Because my mother's crimes and escapades, they come in spikes and waves. They go like this, and then it's kind of down low for a little bit where she's not really causing too much trouble. And then it spikes up and it's a whole lot at once. And then it could spike up for weeks to months at times and then drop back down. And it's always been that way every step of the way. And she does that so she doesn't get caught. So then when she almost gets caught, if I'm able to almost get her caught, she pulls back heavily and just kind of it's at a very low point. So during the time I brought Charmaine in, it was at a low point. It wasn't like extreme in that moment, but I knew it was only a matter of a couple months before it was going to start back up to that again. So I had to have her get to know the real me and see the injury first, because secondary to why I brought her in for these crimes and these escapades and this harassment and what was going on, I was also having an issue with the people around me understanding that I had a very extreme medical emergency happen and that I was never going to return to normal. And the person that they're looking for is not coming back. And I knew that from the day it happened. And because my mother was repeating so many delusions to the people that live in my household, she was getting my dad to pick up my older kids. She was repeating the delusions about me to all of them. Not she's not allowed in my house, and I was not near them or with them when any of this was happening, but their behavior told me that that's what was going on, because it was so excessive that they were coming into my house when I couldn't have sound, and I'm trying to rest and recover, and I'm not resting and recovering, and there was no rest, no recovery, no proper treatment. That their behavior was causing further injury, and I was being forced to yell when I couldn't have any sound at all, or just my regular voice, and I was being forced to yell and scream. And it was causing so many excessive issues, that I needed her to see that that's what was going on as well, that she's controlling the people around me, their behavior, and the people around me don't understand that I'm injured, that an injury occurred, because she's telling them that I've always had a mental disorder, and that's what they're seeing. And that's not at all what was going on. At the same time, she was preventing treatment within the traditional medical system, which is why it was so extreme and why I was left untreated, why I'm not in an inpatient situation, because this was an inpatient injury. And she caused all of that. And then she's repeating the delusions to the people around me, where I was literally in even further degree of fight or flight and survival mode that entire time. I spent about 2 of those years curled up in a ball, laid out, while everybody is screaming, and I had to allow it to go on. And sometimes I'd be forced to scream back, and at no time was I ever resting or recovering. Even though I did find the private center and I was treating the inpatient injury on an outpatient basis, and self-paying for a lot of the treatment, it wasn't proper treatment, and I wasn't in a complete sterile environment because I still had to travel there and back, which was also a problem. So I'll get into that in a future video as well. But because of how this was being treated and how the people around me were acting, which they were being controlled by my mother and her delusions, it was causing a very serious issue with me not getting any rest or recovery the entire time, in a more extreme degree of survival mode, the most extreme degree any human being could be in, and be left that way in extreme pain, and just left in that manner for years on end with no relief. So it ended with, because it took a few months for Charmaine to see that this was actually going on in my house, and it was my mother causing it. So she had to get to know the real me. Every week she had to like see what was going on in my house, which did not take long. She did start to see, and then I kept, because I couldn't string sentences together properly still when she was brought in. I told her, like, I just kept saying, "You'll see, you'll see." So it didn't take long. She did start to see that that was the problem. That is the other reason I needed her to be brought in, because nobody was ever pulled aside. It was like the people living in my house were expecting, like on the TV, like in the movies, like when a doctor pulls the family aside and says, "Oh, this is how bad it's going to be. This is what's going to happen going forward, blah, 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 blah." That never happened. I was left with no treatment, fighting for my life. My son's in the same boat with me, in an extreme degree of brain swelling as well. His behavior was out of control. I did release a video of him during that time period. It's one of the last carbon monoxide poisoning videos. It's a shorter clip, and I believe it's like part 23 or something like that. Toward the end, there's a few of them, but that's how his behavior was the first 4 years and 8 months of his life, because he was suffering from the carbon monoxide poisoning and brain swelling with me. So this was all going on at once. Still, nobody in my house was acting like that's what was going on. And they needed to understand this, because I was never going to be okay. I was never going to be able to recover without them understanding what was actually going on. So that was the secondary reason for Charmaine being brought in, and they kind of intertwined, because the reason they were acting this way was because of my mother repeating delusions to the people that were in my household. And then they all began just repeating them amongst themselves, just continuing on like that's not what was going on. So once she's seen how extreme it was and how the screaming and yelling just didn't stop for some time, she brought my ex in and saw he was part of the problem. At no time were we ever planning on being together. This was my mother's criminal actions that led us to be together. It was a forced relationship. It was a forced situation because of the crimes and escapades she was committing in the background. The only way to make it stop was for us to work together. That's how I got pregnant. That's how I ended up with my youngest child. And that's how we got permanently injured for the rest of our lives. So when she saw like his mentality behind how he was perceiving everything and what he was doing, she took it upon herself. She not talked to me about this first, but I feel like she knew me well enough in that moment. She talked to me enough to know that I was the one who provided everything for myself, that where I was in life at that point, I got myself there. Nobody helped me. His money was not even paying half of everything going on. Like, I had done everything alone, and all leading up to that, all those years prior, I did everything by myself. She started to realize that. And after she met with him several times, she brought him in, and she realized that he was not going to comprehend what happened to me, that a catastrophic injury had occurred. This is permanent. The person that he's looking for isn't coming back. My kids were not comprehending that. The only one who didn't really realize this is my youngest, because he was too young when it happened. that he's not looking for the other person because he doesn't know the other person. But she saw that his mentality behind it, and she just removed him from my home. And that was when I finally got to have some rest in recovery, because then there wasn't continuous screaming and yelling. So that once that portion was removed, that's where I had some rest. And I was still in survival mode the entire time. And then I continued to treat every day, and I got myself to a certain degree healed. Um, it was the screaming and yelling preventing like what needed to happen as far as repairing my brain tissue and how extreme the situation was. I wasn't going to recover without that screaming and yelling stopping. So once that was going on, because this happened during COVID, so I was still getting the COVID pay for about 6 months of that. Then I finally crossed another threshold where I finally went back to work a little bit after COVID, back to being self-employed, and I was able to generate all of the money that I had my entire life. There was no shortage of. I could have produced more had I not been injured, because I've always had many streams of income, but I was able to at least produce like what I should have been producing. So it didn't matter that he wasn't paying anything or that she told him to leave. None of that mattered, because I was able to produce it on my own. I just needed to be able to rest and recover enough and treat enough to get myself to a place where I could continue to do that for myself. So that's how that happened. But then I really did not get to realize everything that was going on and get out of fight or flight and survival mode until the end of 2022, because shortly after all that, in 2021, Ford Motor Company spilled 15,000 gallons of gasoline where my house sits in Flat Rock. That caused another extreme uproar, and I was on the run for my life. We almost didn't survive it several times, and then I ended up having to purchase my home in Ohio and get us to safety, which I wasn't able to do for about 8 months. And once I finally got down there, towards fall of 2022, that's when I finally had peace and rest and recovery. All prior to that, there was never any peace in my life. It was all very chaotic. It was all survival mode, fight or flight mode my entire life. It never stopped. It literally didn't even sink in that that's how chaotic and what was actually going on to that extreme degree until I got down to my other house in the fall of 2022. And then I kept my address private, and nobody was able to find out where we were. And that's how I kept us safe. And our lives were in danger for many, many different reasons at that time. And that was when I finally realized that I was in survival mode my entire life. Because by then I was like 38, like 30, 39. I was like 39. So I had no clue that it was that extreme until that all happened. And then, more chaos erupted that only went on for a few months, where I was relaxing to a degree where I felt safe and comfortable. And then more chaos erupted in January 2023 when my dad fell. And it's been extremely chaotic ever since. However, I did hold on to the home. I still have it. I'm still working on selling it. But I still went down there regularly until about a little over a year ago. After I moved the furniture out, I wasn't regularly going down there, but I kept the furniture there. I did still regularly go down there because I actually feel safe and comfortable there and at peace, as I've never had that before in my life. So it took all of that to go on for me to understand what was actually going on in all those years and all that extreme survival mode, and it just to continue on with no break. It took all of these circumstances, all these different situations, and my injury is what made everything come out about everything. That's what caused everything to be fully known and come out and finally begin to address it all. And it was Charmaine who finally just started. She realized that everything was so chaotic and I was in survival mode that I wouldn't be able to document. She saw how fast paced it was and how fast the crimes were happening, and the harassment, the abuse, the manipulation, the repeating of the delusions. She realized why she needed to be brought in, because at no time was I ever going to be able to document and piece all of this together in the manner in which it needed to be pieced together. She realized right away I wasn't going to be able to, like, even after I crossed several thresholds, that I still wasn't going to be able to document what needed to be documented and keep up with the ongoing crimes and the harassment and what was actually going on. And at the same time, I was having all these memories come back which she wanted to like keep everything in some type of order for me, because then she realized we're actually dealing with some serious crimes. We're dealing with RICO crimes. There's a lot of people and agencies involved. There's a lot of people with power involved. And so she realized right away like why she was needed. Once we got beyond my injury being that extreme and getting the individuals around me away from me, so that there could be some type of rest and some type of peace. That's, once we got past that, she even saw even more like how serious the matter was, why I needed her. By this time I went into the situation with several sets of evidence right away. So she had all of this documented, and then it got more and more chaotic after we got everything kind of situated with my injury. Not really situated, because I'm still injured. I still deal with all of this. I still live with continuous symptoms. It's just not to an extreme degree. And I'm a little more at peace because it's just been me and my youngest son for almost 2 years now. Well, pretty much since 2022, because when I went down to my house in Ohio, it was just the two of us. So the majority of the last 3 years, it's been a lot more peaceful. And it's just the two of us. But she was able to, kind of just document all of the crimes. And then my dad's injury happened, and she just kept adding to what was already going on. And then with all the memories that came back in the beginning of her being brought in, some memories trickle in here or there down the line, but she has it all documented properly. Whereas, like, my life is just so chaotic, it's not possible for me to continue to document with the amount of harassment, with the amount of crimes, with how fast paced it is, and how injured I still am. It's not possible for me to do that. So she understood, like, the mission kind of toward the beginning. And then once we got me in a more physically safe place, then we could focus more on like the main reason I had to bring her in, and involving all these crimes and all the people who've been helping my mother commit these crimes and what's actually going on, and the trust fund being at the root of all that. So that's still what's going on today. And she has a very clear view. She's talked to many of my family members, and she's also talked to many of the different people who have participated in the crimes. Many of these people have called her directly and reached out to her directly and told on themselves along the way as well. So that, and which I knew was going to happen because that's how my mother operates. So I knew this would happen at some point along the way. So she has all of that as well. And she's going to continue to stay involved at least until those crimes are situated, arrests are made, and my mother's apprehended or deceased. That's pretty much, she'll stay involved as long as that's going on. Or if my injury is still pretty significant and I'm having a lot of problems, she's going to continue to stay involved regarding that as well, because my injury was not documented properly. Other people caused my injury. Other people have re-injured me significantly, and these are crimes. So because of the lack of documentation regarding my injury, she had to document that as well. Because of the extreme nature of it all, there isn't somebody who can say, hey, she's not crazy, this has all really happened to her, I've watched it, she's watched this with her own two eyes. So that's the other reason she needs to stay involved long term. So as long as my injury is still to a significant degree, and as long as I'm continuing to be criminally harassed and re-injured, then yes, she would still need to stay involved regarding that matter as well, because I did not have proper medical treatment when necessary, and it caused a lot further problems. So she is working numerous angles still, and she understood the mission from day one. She was the one who was able to get the individuals away from me who needed to be removed so that there could be some rest. And then she was catching some of the crimes, like even accidentally. She just has to like write everything down because it's just so fast paced. Even if I don't understand it in the moment, or she doesn't, she just writes the stuff down, because eventually it does line up. Even if it's down the line, it does line up. It's just that it's so chaotic. She catches crimes that I haven't even caught, or situations or whatever's going on. She catches things sometimes when I don't, because it's that chaotic. She just has to write it all down. That's all. There would never be any way for me to ever incorporate that into my life. I don't even have daily functioning from my initial injury, and it's been 10 years. So When it comes to my house in Ohio, yes, I'm still working on selling it. It's been a process. There's been a lot of issues along the way. There's been about 10 sales that all fell through. And because I live an hour away and I'm chronically sick, permanently injured, it just makes it a little harder to take care of the matter. But that is getting addressed. And I truly did not know that I had this extreme of an issue and that I'd been in survival mode for my entire life until I got down there at the end of 2022. And that's why I kept my furniture there. I stayed, I kept going there all, even after I came back to this home. I was still going down there for peace because I feel peaceful there. I had never felt that a day in my life, even as a child. Even if I was just with my dad, I knew it was only a matter of time before my mother would be back, or because she lived with us. So it's not like I could make her disappear. I still never had peace, like 100% peace, until that time period happened, until 2022, 2023. Once I had that other house, it didn't happen until then. So I didn't move my stuff out of there until mid 2024. So I was going down there regularly, even after I was back in this house after the 100 grand in damage happened, which at the root, that's my mother's fallout from my mother's escapades and crimes as well, because nobody should have ever been in this house. I should have never been forced from it. But I did film a video down there at one point talking about the peace that I had while I was down there. So I might release that at some point. Um, but the survival mode, I've literally been in it my entire life. It never stopped. My life was chaotic, back to back chaos, back to back escapades, harassment, crimes, all along the way. Initially it was a little more spaced apart with my mother, but what she would do is she would just like wait for me to get everything back in line and flowing really good, and just waiting for the perfect time to like throw a grenade and like blow the whole thing apart, and which being my life, which she would do frequently. So she would do this all the time. And I would be constantly having to pick up the pieces, and then I'd get everything flowing for a brief period of time, and it would happen again. That's what's been going on every step of the way. That is still going on today. She's used many different systems and agencies to help her carry all of this out. There are, I'd say, between 10 and 20 direct individuals involved in the current day who have participated in like the major events that have occurred, because a lot of these people are police officers and court systems, because of how she's going about carrying these escapades out and these crimes against me, and all this, this false reporting, these delusional phone call placing. I mean, she was even placing delusional phone calls to my kid's orthodontist and using them to carry this out as well. I was going to do a video there, and it looks like the lady retired and the whole office is closed. So I was going to go there and do that, but I'll talk about it in a different video. But I mean, it goes as far as her using any person that would be willing to help, including her family members. I've had to make police reports on them, and they think they're doing something right or that they're in the right, and they just believe everything she's saying, and they continue to harass and operate against me as if everything she has said since I was a small child to the current day, as if all of that has been real every step of the way. And none of these people are aware that those are all delusions. This is harassment. These are crimes. These are RICO crimes. None of what she's been telling anybody has ever been real. I've literally been providing everything for myself my entire adult life, and no one's ever helped me. I've only had the opposite of help. And so, along with that, kind of comes like part of why I've been single the majority of my adult life, because I can't put at risk what I've built to have peace, because I don't get to restart. I can't just bring people into what I'm doing. My level of success and what I've been building, because I started at a very young age, I've been ahead of people my age for a very long time. So like just dating somebody in my 20s, it was still really hard because nobody was on my level. Um, it was just really hard to do. And then I can't put at risk everything I had to work for, to, even though I've been in survival mode and fight or flight mode all these years, I still had to have my own space, my own home, and provide everything for myself. So, even though I had to do all that, I did it every step of the way, and it had to remain that way, because I can't just invite somebody in when my level of success is usually higher, or it was, the majority of these years, it's been higher than most of the people who like feel entitled to talk. I'm going to say feel entitled to talk to me, because a lot of people feel entitled to like ask me on dates or talk to me or whatever. But they're not realizing like how far ahead of them in life that I am, and that I'm self-made, self-built. A lot of people have never realized that, even when I was younger, 18, 21, 25, doesn't really matter. Even today, it's still a current problem today. And because I've been building for so long, I'm still ahead of other people. So there's just a lot of people who just like feel entitled to date me, when they don't realize like I don't really engage in that type of thing. It's not an option, because of how I've had to provide my own peace, my own stability, and with my mother's crimes and escapades and harassment, that it wasn't really an option to ever bring anybody in. There wasn't anybody that I'd ever met in my younger years that could match my level of fly. So then I just stayed single. And like I said, when I was like approaching 30, that's when my mother went on the 2013 escapade, and I was forced to work with my daughter's dad, and how I ended up with my younger son. Even then, the whole time, like we were technically like together, like he was not operating on my team. I was still doing everything I had done as a single individual the entire time he was living in my home. So he was just like off in his own little world the whole time, which is why Charmaine also removed him. But even like going forward from there, I'm permanently injured. I'm still living in the initial medical emergency, still treating the initial medical emergency. It is not positive movement forward. I have a lot of setbacks. I have a lot of re-injuries. Um, and then my brain is still very injured. And I don't have the ability to fight with people and argue with people, which is exactly why everybody in my household is not in my household, and it's just my younger son and I don't have the ability to just, not only that, but I don't have daily functioning. I don't live a normal life. We live modified lives because of our injuries. We can't always go out and about in the world. We do have to stay homebound. And because I had so many significant setbacks and loss of treatment for a period of time, which cannot happen, and it did happen. And I knew that if, I knew going into this, some years into this, and how long it took me to get to where I was, if that happened, that I was going to be swimming up Schitt's Creek without a paddle, and it was going to be very hard for me to get back to where I was had I lost treatment, and then that did happen. So I don't have the ability to just like date people, or like live a normal life, or I still have to provide everything for myself and what I built to the day that, to the day I became injured, and I still have to maintain that and build off that going forward with my original plans way before the injury, because there's no way for me to restart or rebuild, and I still have to provide everything for myself. And with me being that injured, I don't have the ability to just date people or argue with people or like engage in anything like that. And a lot of the people who feel entitled to date me, like I said, first of all, they're not on my level. And then second of all, a lot of people like to argue, fight, excuse me, argue, fight, and whatnot. I don't have the ability to have that in my life. It can't be a part of my life. I briefly talked to a few people here or there, after my injury or whatever. But like, I'm just going to give an example. One of them I was talking to for, I think, like 11 or 12 days, and immediately wanted to like accuse me of something through text, or go back and forth and like fight back and forth and like act like I did something that I didn't do, when like doesn't matter. I still provide everything for myself. Everything's mine. Like I can do whatever I want. So at the end of that text said something about just set my shit on the porch. I'm like, yep, no problem. I don't have the ability to do that. I don't have the ability to go back and forth, argue, none of that. I don't have time for it. My brain, my injuries do not allow that to be in my life. So not only was I already living the majority of my adult life single because of me providing everything for myself and having to maintain a level of peace to have what I have, and what I set out to have as a young child when all this was going on. It then became even harder after the injury, just because of how serious the injury is, how severe it is, the fact that it's not positive movement forward. More treatment is needed daily for quite some time. And I'd say with the amount of re-injuries and the amount of setbacks I've had, I am probably 1 to 2 years of daily treatment away from where I need to be before it can be less than that. And I've retreated the same steps over and over because the situation is so fragile. My brain and my body are so fragile that it doesn't take much to set me back. So where I am now, like, yeah, now I need another 1 to 2 years to catch up to where I was 4 years ago. I was in a better place 4 years ago than I am today because of all the re-injuries, all the problems, all the setbacks. And other people don't comprehend that. Like, let's just say I go to a bar and hang out, and somebody wants to talk to me while I'm there, and they just think I'm a regular person and they want my number and such. I don't have time to do that. I don't do that. I don't give out my number. I don't have time to do that. I'm very sick. I'm very injured. Odds are, if you see me at a bar, you're not going to see me there, probably ever again. Like, I don't really go out all that often, but, or let's just say I'm at a restaurant. Either one, doesn't matter. They're not realizing I don't have the ability to accommodate that into my life, that it's not possible, that I am very sick and injured. And I just went out like one time to like be able to go out one time. So people don't understand that. And I don't really try to explain it to people. I just say I don't date, or I don't really do that. I don't give out my number is usually what I say. And that same goes with me working in the adult entertainment industry all of those years. I already didn't give out my number prior to the injury. All those years that I worked in that industry prior, I already operated that way. I operate a certain way. I'm there to make my money. I go home. I keep my life is very compartmentalized. It does not mix and mingle. I do not like hang out with people from work and such like that. People that work there or patrons, either one. And it was already that way. So then after my injury, it stayed the same. It doesn't really change. Like I said, there's maybe been like a handful of people I've ever exchanged information with. And so, but I'm very selective. They're few and far between. It's not like I'm meeting people regularly. And usually these people are much older than me because they would have to be able to understand the seriousness of the condition, how fragile I am. There's many factors involved if I were to like talk to somebody outside of work, or like let's just say I met them at a restaurant or something, which like hasn't really happened. So like I just go out for a day. I usually like hang out with strangers and then go home if I am well enough to do something like that, and then I don't usually talk to people again. So people don't recognize that because of the way I look. I don't look sick and injured, or nobody has the degree of injury that I have, how serious it is. That's not normal for someone to be poisoned by carbon monoxide with brain injuries, for someone to be under treatment for that long and to realize that it's that extreme, that it took that many years of treatment, and then for other people to have me significantly re-injured numerous times, caused a very big degree of setback for me. People aren't realizing that, and I can't really explain it to people either. So I just kind of like stay away from the whole situation altogether. And I'm like safest by myself. And I've always made all my own money all these years, over 20 years, like almost 30 years. So I'm comfortable doing things that way. If I really want to talk to people, I'll go somewhere and hang out by myself and talk to people. Um, it's not like I'm completely isolated, and I just choose to be that way, especially with how severe the injury's been like the past year or so. I'm more homebound than not lately, but I also have a lot of projects running, a lot of things I'm working on, and those are all, I work on everything from home. So it's not like I don't need to leave to go places and whatnot, but should I so choose, it's literally going to be like one time and then I leave and that's it. So it would be really hard for me to ever bring anybody in to what I'm doing and like understand the injury and what I have going on. I can't like meet somebody else's expectations or work on this or that. And a lot of like, oh, I'd say probably 100% of people, they expect like a certain degree of things to be done or this or that. That can't happen in my world. I have to do everything on my own time. I still don't have my own daily functioning from the initial injury. I do still spend periods of time incapacitated. Um, there's just several factors involved with like why that can't happen, because other people aren't comprehending that I have to do what I can. Things that well, I'd say probably the majority of the population, they consider certain things like important to do within a day or within a household or like in a relationship or whatever. I can't I can't consistently do any of those things. 100% I cannot consistently do any of those things. It doesn't matter what they are. I can't. And then that leads to a greater degree of stress and more problems, which I don't have the ability to accommodate. So the entire situation has to be avoided like altogether. Although I can say like there is a handful of people who do get me, or I've known them long enough or talked to them long enough, or we've hung out like enough to where like they do understand, or um like I can like tolerate being around certain people, but it's literally like a small handful of people, and most of those people are older than me, because they have to have like a certain degree of skill, a certain degree of knowledge, and it can't be people who are ignorant, because that those people cause more significant re-injury and problems. So there is like a handful of people that I can talk to. But I would say the majority of the population, because of how advanced I've always been and how long I've been on my own and what I've been building and what I've done for myself by myself, the majority of the population is not where I am, like mentally and emotionally and financially. And like, should I happen to find somebody who kind of is, like, those are the people I can kind of tolerate. And well, maybe a little more than tolerate. But like, yeah, there's just not that many people like available that would be a candidate for me to even talk to, is what I'm kind of getting at. So that's part of the survival mode. It's part of me having to continuing to do things by myself, and that's how I'm going to maintain the level of peace and be able to continue my income and build everything I've been building. That's the only way to go about it. I really can't accommodate ever dating somebody and putting that into my life with the injury, with especially when you mix my mother's ongoing crimes with all of that. I can't get anyone to fully understand it. So, explaining that to someone, that's really hard. And when you take just that situation, let's just say I wasn't injured, getting somebody to understand that it's very rare. And then you take that and the injury, it's extremely rare to get somebody to understand the whole picture of what's going on, and to understand that I'm not the problem. That this has literally been going on my entire life, and it's caused all these problems every step of the way, all the problems I've had along the way. That's the cause of it. And so to get somebody to understand all of that, people don't at all. Like 99% of the people I've ever talked to do not understand it. So I don't attempt to. And I keep everything compartmentalized, and then I come back to my home safely by myself and lock the rest of the world out. And that's just how it has to be. And at some point, that began including my older two kids along the way to some degree. They're not like completely locked out, but to some degree that had to happen at one point, to some degree, because even they were not understanding what was going on, and it was my mother's criminal actions and behavior that was causing that in them as well. So that's just kind of how things are, how things have to be going forward. And I do know where I'm at treatment wise, and just my injury and the treatment alone, to get somebody to understand like what I deal with the ongoing symptoms I live with every day, what's all going on. I can't even get somebody to understand it, like, really at all. But people like do understand that I'm sick. There are a few people who like they do understand that I'm sick or that I'm injured. But I don't even try to explain it. I'd rather just leave and be by myself. So that's just how things have to be. And hopefully, like, once arrests are made, I can finally like exhale permanently and be out of survival mode, because that is a big part of the problems that are still going on in the current and have gone on the majority of my injury. That is one of the biggest problems regarding the matter. So if that problem can be permanently taken care of and removed, then I could probably recover a little faster as well. But I do know that I'm going to require treatment for life. That's another issue. And I have had gray hair since I was 20 years old. I was about 14, but I've had to color it to cover it up consistently from the time I was 20 years old. There is one short video that I filmed during COVID at the treatment center in the parking lot, because they were extorting me at the time, where you can see how gray my hair was. So this was like 5 years ago. I let it go during COVID because I wasn't going anywhere but to treatment and back. And I knew I couldn't do anything else, and that's just what had to be done at that time. So there is a video that shows it. And I believe it's like under the Oxford playlist, the crimes at Oxford. There is a video that shows how gray my hair is, and it's been 5 years since that day, so I'm sure it's even worse. But I believe the amount of gray hair was caused by me being in survival mode all of these decades and just it never stopping. So that is also like why everything kind of has to be addressed in the order and the manner in which it all is, because there's no way for me to pick up the pieces of my life or even begin to live my life without these matters getting situated, which I think I've mentioned in a couple other videos. And that's really hard to explain to other people as well. And even people that have been my friend for decades, years or decades, they don't get it either. Even some of the people who have seen some of this long term, they don't get it. And they don't get the injury. They don't get the seriousness of my mother's crimes. Or maybe they start to understand some of my mother's crimes, but nobody understands the degree of injury or what I'm forced to deal with or how things have to be and what's actually going on. I've gotten rid of pretty much all of the people who I considered like friends as well. And I didn't really have a choice because of what's all gone on, the fallout, the outcome of everything, where I am in the current, and then how they kind of act towards me regarding what I have going on. I don't have time to deal with that either. So I'd rather continue to build things in the manner in which I have. I'm in complete control of my income. I have been for a very long time, way prior to my injury. And my next moves, which were planned like, 20 years ago, those are finally taking place. Matters are getting situated. That's why I had to take a break from filming a lot of these videos. And I do have like business partners at this point, even though like, you know, we're not we don't work together. We're not it's not the same business. They're self-employed by themselves. I'm self-employed by myself. So those matters are continuing on. They are more like-minded like myself. So I do have people that I talk to regularly. It's just people like if in my general area, I guess you could say, or people who majority of the people who've been a part of my life at some point, they're just not like viable candidates to really keep around, especially because of like the situations that I have going on. It's not it's not something I can really deal with. And then as far as me working in the adult entertainment industry, I kept all of that compartmentalized as well during that entire time period. I've pretty much been retired for the past 2 years. I did work a little bit at the end of last year, like the beginning of this year, and I basically was running it based on when my insurance checks were coming due to the work on the house because I can't control when those were coming, but it had to be addressed. So I was kind of like intertwining them and working in between them. But I've pretty much been retired for the past 2 years almost. And like the other matters that I've had planned in advance, that is what's going on. But even when I was doing that, it was already like that before my injury. And it was the same situation. I would just keep it all separate. And me being single my entire adult life, I was in that industry for like since 2007. So, if I really wanted to talk to somebody, I would just go to work. It kind of makes up for like not dating people and then like seeing a variety of different types of people. Me being in that industry, gives me a pretty good idea of what's going on out in the world. And everything was just kept compartmentalized and that portion of my life was just kept at work. So it's not like I've been completely closed off from the world. I have a really great degree of life experience and experience with the general public because of the different lines of work that I've been in all of these years. And then I was in the restaurant and bar industry for 20 years as well. So I have a lot of life experience and I'm not like completely closed off. And I never really was because I was still always going to work in one form or another every step of the way. So I know my life is a lot different than the average person. And there's probably not another person who can compare to what I've dealt with, what I've been through in the past, what's still going on. Um, but yeah, I don't really feel like I missed out in that manner because my level of knowledge is just so great from dealing with so many different types of people along the way, that it actually gave me more life experience than the average person. So, um, I am still in survival mode. That's kind of why I'm in bed right now. I was going to film a video earlier and then I chose not to. And then I got upstairs and I was like, well, maybe I will from my bed. But I don't normally film them from my bed. I normally film them like while I'm sitting all the way up and looking a little bit more alert and a little bit better. But I figure I just need to try to get as many videos filmed to get as much of the information out as possible, because there's just so many different videos that need to be filmed in order to tell my story fully, in order to get others to understand what's actually going on, how these crimes have affected my life to a very extreme degree. It's affected every aspect of my life, and which has caused basically everything I said in this video, why I've had to live my life so differently than everybody else, and why I can't just bring other people into what I have going on. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna leave that there, and I will be back with more on. I can't remember what I was gonna film next, but I have an entire list of videos, and I kind of have them ordered out in how I want to release them. So I will be back with another one. Thanks. Bye.